Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Maverick webinar, Children in Crisis, Exploring Better Ways to Protect South Africa's Most Vulnerable. I'm your host, Tamsin Metlikamp, and I'm a journalist with our Maverick Citizen team. Before we kick off in earnest, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do aim to make these interactive sessions, so please do interact with the polls and links that we have on the platform, and feel free to pop any questions you might have for our speakers in the chat. I recently worked with several of my colleagues on a series of articles for Child Protection Week, looking at violence against children, and we were disturbed by a lot of the accounts and statistics that came out of that collaboration. I think we can all agree that one of the markers of a well-functioning society is how well we protect our most vulnerable, especially our children. And it just feels like at the moment we are falling short of the mark. There have been several high-profile cases of violence against children in recent years, a prime example being the Jocelyn Smith case here in the Western Cape, where the mother and two others were recently convicted of kidnapping and selling the then 6-year-old. But there are many other incidents that don't make it into the media, the public eye, or even the courts. And so today we really wanted to explore how we can improve children's safety and tackle many of the threats that they are faced with on a day-to-day basis. We have many extraordinary people in our child protection sector, and we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by two such individuals today. Miranda Jordan-Friedman, who is the founding director of Women and Men Against Child Abuse, which is a child protection nonprofit organization committed to fighting for the rights of our young people. And Sina Marawana, who is a child protection specialist with UNICEF South Africa, a UN agency which is committed to realizing the rights of children. Sina, Miranda, welcome, and thank you so much for being a part of this discussion today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Before we get into our other questions, I wanted to give you both an opportunity to explain a bit more about what your organizations do. So Miranda, if you could explain a bit about Women and Men Against Child Abuse and its role here in SA.
Okay, well, I think I first need to talk about violence in South Africa and the fact that 1 out of 5 children are victims of abuse in South Africa. And the violence against children, or VAC, short name for that, ranges from sexual violence, violence in school, youth and gang violence, violence in the home. And often children are actually faced with violence before they're even born through their mother's intimate partner's violence. And children are especially vulnerable victims. I think we really need to think of just every circumstance that a child faces violence in South Africa and how prevalent it is. As Women and Men Against Child Abuse, we've been active for 28 years, and we have 2 arms. We have an arm which is our advocacy arm, and that really looks at creating awareness. It looks at monitoring courts. It looks at also educating the public on what happens when you enter the criminal justice system, how to report cases, where to report cases, and if you need assistance, if you are going to make a statement. And then we have our 2 kids clinics. One was founded, that is the one on the East Rand in Boksburg in 2000, and 2 years later, the one in Alexandra. And actually, they were both formed because of 2 particularly horrific child abuse cases. One was a physical case and one was a sexual abuse case. And in those 2 clinics, we really offer a basket of services. These are all free services to the communities. We work with what is called now the FCS. At the time, they were called the Child Protection Units, but they're now called the Family Violence and Sexual Offences Unit. And we work closely with them in both referring cases and getting cases that are reported and referred to them, as well as to schools, as well as family members who may suspect violence, any type of violence within their home. And there we go right from play therapy, doing assessments. We have a specialized small courtroom where we can do court preparation. And we basically handhold, that's where the 2 arms work together. where either one of our social workers will go to court with the child, or if one of the advocacy members needs to go to court. And then we actually have extended that, and we now go through to the parole, a system as well, which now makes it a huge. We really cover the child, if I look at it, the criminal justice system, right from the beginning of the reporting right to the end of the parole system. So that's us.
Incredible. And I'll definitely come back to the court system factor, because that's such a huge part of our child protection system. But Sina, if you could chip in with the UNICEF South Africa and just a bit about the role that they play in child protection here.
Thank you very much. As we all know, that UNICEF is a United Nations agency, and our work is more developmental in nature, but we are also really intervening in situation of humanitarian crisis. And we are, as an organization, standing on for the mainstreaming of children's rights. We do a lot of advocacy work. We do a lot of evidence generation, that is research, and we are really working with member states, in different countries to ensure that we really support the child's rights agenda. We are existing in over 190 countries, globally. And we have actually, UNICEF has been there, for more than, 75 years. We are really a very kind of old, UN agency. And we are really in line with our mandate, the only UN agency that is actually, mandated to really, address the rights of children globally. So in South Africa, we are working with different, actors. We are working with the government of South Africa. We are supporting, the good cause of ensuring that the well-being of children in this country is well safeguarded. We are working with civil society as well, supporting the work that, civil society organizations are doing. And we are working really with a lot of actors, including academia, to ensure that, people in that field are really able to ensure that, they work around, the contextualized evidence, in the context of South Africa that talks to the issues of children in South Africa. And we are also working with private sector to ensure that actually we've got, kind of, a conglomeration of actors, who actually work as duty bearers to protect children, including children themselves, because we believe as UNICEF, in line with the UNCRC, that child participation is very critical. Families, communities, your gatekeepers, such as your traditional leaders, your politicians, we work with everybody else in South Africa to ensure that we promote, the welfare as well as the well-being of children in the country. Over.
Absolutely. And Sina, you mentioned UNICEF as a global organization, and it obviously has outposts in many countries around the world. With that, what have you observed about how South Africa's child protection efforts, how our efforts compare with these other countries? And are there places where we're maybe falling short of global benchmarks?
Maybe what is important is to mention that UNICEF really, as you rightfully said in your introductory remarks, that, you are concerned about the high levels of violence against children in the country. The same sentiments is actually being shared, by UNICEF, even if it's not only in South Africa, but globally. But I think in South Africa, the situation is even more dire. If we really sort of look at what the Global Status Report of 2020 says on ending violence against children, it mentions that 1 in every 2 children globally between the ages of 2 to 17 experience some form of violence. But when we come to South Africa, the situation says 3 in every 4 children, and I think this is also a quote in one of your recent publications during the Child Protection Week, experience some form of violence. So it really sort of tells us, as South Africa, that the levels of violence in this country are very high. It's really very high. And if we have to look at, the child protection systems, which is basically now the model that has actually been institutionalized by UNICEF in order to gauge the level of protection that individual countries are doing in accordance with their systems to really meet the needs of children, to ensure that every child is protected, every child is cared for, every child is nurtured, in a good environment that allows, children to grow and to realize their potential. We tend to realize that South Africa is really not doing as well as other countries are doing. If you have to go and look at, countries with a very kind of well-resourced, well-oiled child protection system, like your Sweden, where actually they even go to an extent of having a parent code of conduct to say actually what are the roles that parents can play in protecting their children. They've got a very kind of clear legal system. They've got basically what we call, a cadre of social service professionals who are well-skilled, who are well-trained in the protection of children. And actually they are able to work together, in a very integrated approach, as we know for a fact that child protection is not a matter of one organization or one department or one entity. It calls for a number of actors to work together. That is why we are talking of multi-agency, coordination, and collaboration. You find that in such countries such as Sweden, Norway, these systems, are working very well. In New Zealand, they've got, a very good, kind of legal framework. And in some instances, they even have, structures that actually ensures accountability and oversight. So if we have to look at this model that talks about system strengthening for child protection, South Africa, yes, has a legal system that is very good. The legal framework is very good. We do have, social service professionals that are actually sort of really doing their level best to protect children. We do have, a continuum of services. But if we scratch deeper, then we tend to realize that the translation of the very good, legal framework, it is not up to the T. And therefore, then we tend to identify some gaps in the implementation of the very legal system that we are so much praised of globally, because basically there are certain things that are not adding up. You are resourcing of such a system. Is it well resourced? Is government really in their age, and preparedness to address, violence against children? Are we really, performing to the expected level? And if that was the case, we wouldn't be having children who are still falling through the cracks. We wouldn't be having children who are still kidnapped and not even actually understanding where they are at this point in time, as you rightfully mentioned. And we wouldn't be still having children who experience violence in the home, in the school, and even in communities. So comparatively speaking, South Africa, we are really doing our best, maybe we can say, but we are not really doing what is actually, the level best that is expected to protect our children. We still need to do more.
Thank you, Sina. And I definitely will come back to that point about interagency and interdepartmental cooperation, because I know we've chatted before about the way these different systems work together for child protection and where that can be improved. But Miranda, I just wanted to bring you in because women and men against child abuse, they're very much on the ground in a lot of these court cases where you see horrific things. And my heart goes out to your members and the families they support, because I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But having had those observations in these court spaces, what have you identified as some of the primary threats or new and emerging risks that children are facing in South Africa?
Well, I think personally, I'm going to go back a step and say that I think one of the most important things we need to look at in South Africa is unplanned and unwanted children, because children born into these circumstances are far more likely to experience neglect, abuse, and even death. And so I think one of the key preventative tools that we want to say is really promoting comprehensive sexuality education. It is absolutely vital in our country because planned and wanted children are far more likely to be protected by their families, by their parents, by their communities. So this is a huge factor that we need to think of because the cases we work with on a daily basis, which range from the neglect to the murder of children, one or both parents are involved, is because these children were not planned, were not wanted, and then effectively are destroyed. So I think what I needed to also say here is that I want to pick up from something important that Sina was talking about when she was speaking about the systems in other countries and how well they're doing and what's happening in South Africa. And I think as an organization, our focus is on ensuring that victims are seen and heard by a system that routinely fails them. So yes, in South Africa, we have very good laws. We have excellent laws. How do we implement those laws? How do those laws practically work out for families that enter the criminal justice system? The length of time that they have to be prepared for as a family to come into the criminal justice system. And I think most of our work can really be described as running interference between the victims that we represent and a system that is not built to serve the children, especially those who are victims of sexual violence, and particularly when these are single witnesses. These are single witnesses, and they are needing, what we're needing to do is prove our case. And the child has to have the voice. We have to empower the child to have the voice to actually speak. So we need to stand up for those children. And I think even though our government claims to place victims at the center of the justice system, this is actually very far from the truth in practice. And we have countless examples of that to prove otherwise. For instance, some courts, we see that they treat the victims and their families with respect and dignity, while other courts are actually quite hostile to the victims and to their families. And in one particular, and I'm going to just say what I'm going to say, because I feel that we now need to not talk only big picture, but actually bring it into how do we deal with the different courts where we have in the High Court in general, we have that respect and dignity for the victims and their families, and even those representing and assisting and supporting and hand-holding the victims and their families. However, we have, for example, a court like Alexandra Magistrates Court. We have a clinic in Alexandra. It's at the Alexandra Police Station, and we're probably in court every second day with the amount of victims that we have. And we have a little boy called Neo that we have, just giving you a pseudonym here, that has literally experienced institutional cruelty. A prosecutor that is not prepared, a prosecutor who we have now taken to the Chief Justice. We will take this further to the DPP and to the NDPP. But what I'm just saying is that our victims cannot remain invisible. They need to be visible. And, there's just only so much media that we can call. We cannot call the media out every day to a case in South Africa. Let me just tell you that every day in South Africa, we have tens of cases being heard in every court around the country. We currently work in the larger Gauteng court, some Tshwane, and also in the Cape. So I'm not even covering some of the other provinces. So it's a massive amount of cases. But what we're just saying is that when we have a police investigation that is not properly investigated, when we have a prosecutor that is not prepared for their case, and we effectively silence the victim, what we are basically doing is we are reinstating the fact that abuse thrives in secrecy, and the justice system frequently contributes to silencing victims, both from the pre-trial representations that are made by the accused to the DPP and NDPP, to a current case where we have and which we have had many before, but a current one in Cape Town at the moment, where a mid-trial Section 174 application is brought. What is a 174? This is completely brought to throw the victim and his or her family into a state of anxiety, and that is when the accused attorney will say that he doesn't believe the state has done their job, and has proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and they believe the case should be dismissed. This is after a victim has testified. So we need to also understand those. What does that mean? Families get very upset, get very confused, don't understand even how these can come along. What does this mean? The general public, I think if I say a 174 application, probably will not understand what we're talking about. All these things need to be explained pre-trial. So just entering the system is hugely anxiety making, and on top of it, there needs to be a massive amount of education. You may never think you will enter into the criminal justice system. You'll never think your child may enter the criminal justice system, or anyone you know would enter. But these are all things that unfortunately are aimed at derailing, brought by the defense attorneys, derailing the court process. And our job is to counter that silence and to help victims reclaim their voice.
Ryan, I'm going to step in here just to bring in some of our audience questions that we're getting from that side. I think, Sina, if you could take one, we have a question here from Dr. Andrew Spalmer, just referencing your comments on South Africa's comparison to other countries and asking, how does South Africa compare to countries with a similar GDP? So maybe some other developing countries that are trying to tackle similar problems in child protection. And then after you've tackled that, Sina, Miranda, if you wouldn't mind just stepping in on Hazel Friedman's question, where she asks, what are the most overt behavioral signs in a sexually abused child? And how should child protection experts frame their questions to extract information without causing further trauma? And then I think we'll circle back to some of the institutional problems that you raised there, Miranda. But Sina, if you could take that question.
Thank you, Tamsin. I think this is a very good question. But maybe before I even sort of, categorically go to the countries, I would like to draw the attention of the audience to the fact that even if we are talking about countries that are, upper, middle income countries, or countries that are well-to-do economically, like your Sweden, your Norway, New Zealand, and the like, they are not doing anything of the extraordinary. All what they do is actually sort of creating safety nets for children who really need protection. They've got the legal framework, just like South Africa. They've actually have, the universal social protection and early intervention services that are able to pick up the early signs of abuse and intervene, at the correct time to ensure that children do not fall through the cracks. They do have the very same, multi-agencies that I talked about that are working together and that are collaborating, and they've got the culture of child participation. This is nothing strange to what is actually happening in South Africa. But the question is South Africa really institutionalizing all this, mechanisms that we are talking about? Or is South Africa really sort of, doing bits, pockets of interventions there and there? And we are unable to aggregate the work that we are supposed to be doing. And the same applies to resourcing. So is South Africa resourcing the system that is actually dealing with child protection? Are we able to quantify the investment that the country is doing in order to ensure that children are well protected? And coming to some of the countries that are actually having almost the same gross development, whatever GDP. So we need to look at countries such as Burkina Faso, which is basically, really, if you compare the two countries with, I think there is not much of the different. South Africa might even be seen to be the best, but actually then that country is doing also very, excellently and well, to protect the children. Indonesia, their child protection system is well-oiled, is well-resourced, is well-financed, and they are really sort of very accountable in actually sort of being able to indicate the services that the children are receiving once the child is being violated, but also strengthening prevention, because we cannot really forever go on response services to say how effective is the criminal justice system, whereas actually then we forget a very important component, which is basically prevention at the earliest time, and actually being able to pick up the signs and symptoms and reporting so that intervention can be done at the correct time and to save the child from going through the traumatic experience of being violated. So it's actually, the way of how to do things, and maybe how to actually, we up our game to ensure that really, as the broader system, the whole ecosystem, we work together to ensure that we protect children, and we emphasize and strengthen and invest on prevention to ensure that children do not fall through the cracks.
Thank you, Sina. That's very helpful. Miranda, if you wouldn't mind stepping in on the question about victims of sexual abuse and those issues.
Okay, I think you'll just give me the second part of what her question was, but I'm just going to start with the first part. And I'm going to say that a child, a baby child, their first ways of control of anything that they can do for themselves when they start being 1 and 2, and is they're able to feed themselves. So they can take a spoon and they can sort of aim for their mouth and they can put something in. The next thing is that they can start going to the, potty by themselves. They can start making a wee, and they have a little bit of control over that, and they can start, can have a poo, and they can, so those are the areas. So what are we talking about? About the mouth, we're talking about the vagina or the penis, and we're talking about the anus. And when this is sexually violated by somebody, they take that very sense of control away from the child. So the thing that they were able to do for themselves is suddenly something that someone else is doing to them against their will. This is not saying they don't want to eat this, or they don't want this put into their mouth or inserted or touched or anything else. So we first have to look at that huge sense of lack of control that huge powerlessness that comes. And often when we know the children later, or as they grow up and they become adolescents, and they want to regain that power. And then we can talk then about often what happens with self-inflicted harm or harming others, is because it is regaining that sense of power that they lost at that time. We also need to think of that huge sense of trust, that huge and massive betrayal that happens with sexual abuse, because this is often done by somebody who has regular and close contact with the child. So the child, it is either a parent of the child, it is either a family, a greater family connection, aunt, uncles, grandfathers, step-grandfathers, stepmothers. It is a family friend, somebody who has access into the area of the child's rooms and the child's private areas. We'll talk further about that if you want to again later. But basically we have loss of power, we have loss of control, we have huge betrayal, and a complete confusion of what is love. This is now often the person who's supposed to love and take care of them is the very person that is abusing them. So these massive conflicts that happen to a child that's been sexually abused have huge and enormous and long-lasting ramifications. And it takes a massive amount of therapy. The quicker the therapy, the better. The sooner the child can verbalize. Now, can you imagine if this happens to a child who is not verbalizing yet? So a tiny baby, a young toddler who can't quite express what happens to them, and then internalizes this and then acts out this behavior. Or then this will affect their sexualization, their relationships, work, self-value. So that gives you just a small insight into the huge ramifications of child sexual abuse. And that, quite frankly, I'm so passionate about the subject because I believe that a person who does this not only takes away the child's childhood, they also take away the adulthood and the potential of who this child would have been and the trajectory of the life this child would have been. And if you're sadly in a position to see what happens to a young child and who they were before and then who they are afterwards is, I just think it's probably one of the most criminal things that can happen to any child in the world.
It's hard to wrap your head around anyone putting a child in that position. And I think it makes the points you make about the gaps and the failures in our institutions for accountability all the more important, because no child who's been through something like that should then get that second victimization through a system that doesn't properly handle the case. And so I think, given the institutional problems you've pointed out, it's really important for us to think, what are the solutions to that? How do we improve? And Sina, I know we've talked before about interagency cooperation for child protection, the fact that it's Department of Social Development, police, NPA. There's a lot of actors involved. And there are some gaps that sometimes occur between those actors. Could you talk to us a bit about, when it comes to strengthening our institutional response to crimes against children, how do we bridge those gaps? How do we ensure that we have a collaborative system where all these different parts work together more efficiently?
What we must really understand is that, as rightfully said from the beginning, we need to really emphasize on prevention. And whilst we are talking about, interagency collaboration, we need to also bear in mind that it is not only the state departments that really need to play a role. The family, it's a very basic unit of socialization. And we are quite aware in South Africa that we do have, social norms, that actually, fuel, issues of violence. We have children who actually within the home get, sort of, exposed. They get exposure to violence where actually there is, perpetual, physical violence, exchange of, words, that are not really meant, for the ears of children, children are actually emotionally, also abused in most instances from, the centers or the units that are supposed to be protecting them. I've mentioned that there's home, we have the school, where actually also children really face a lot of challenges. But if we have to really look at response and say basically how best, can all these duty bearers and different actors play a role in ensuring that, the response mechanisms, the response services are actually addressing the needs of children. We should start actually even from reporting. That actually no one should be quiet. Me and you and everybody else in this platform, we do have a responsibility of ensuring that if actually we witness any violation of some kind to the rights of children, especially be it physical, be it, somehow sexual in one way or the other, we need to report that. But reporting is not enough if there is no action. And the action that needs to be taken simply challenges, everybody else in the ecosystem to say, as a Department of Social Development official or social worker, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing to support this child who has, in one way or the other, gone through this gruesome, experience of being violated? And you've got your others, actors in the ecosystem, your police, to who we need to report and inform them if there is any violation, so that whoever really violates the child, as Marinda has said, is really, facing the wrath of law, as we know for a fact that, no one in line with the Constitution of South Africa, needs to violate the right of the other person, especially when we take into consideration a child. We do have also, the health component that needs to come to the picture to really do the medical assessment, to provide that psychological assessment, to be in the position to identify any pockets of evidence that could assist in the criminal justice system processes, for prosecution. So we should all play a role here. And also we should not forget, we are not only looking at the crime itself, we are looking at the person who is violated. How do we also support this child so that this child does not really fall through the cracks or get really secondary victimization? Firstly, you find that the child will be referred from one system to the other, from social development to the police, or from health to the social worker, or from the police to the social worker for counseling, for support services. What are our referral mechanisms? What referral corridors are being built to ensure that this actually creates a safety net for the children? In most instances, children are referred manually or even verbally. And this is actually one of the contributory factors where then it might be a problem for the child to reach another station or another department, because basically the referral mechanism is weak. The referral mechanism does not protect the child, let alone the support that the child needs to get from each and every state actor who is actually within the criminal justice system. The children, as well as their caregivers, as rightfully said by Miranda earlier, they get actually discouraged, they actually lose trust in the system, and they finally sit with these emotional wounds that actually are never addressed. And the perpetrators get away with murder because basically, as said, the case is actually seen not to be convincing to the court, and people are acquitted who have actually ruined the lives of the young ones. So the referral mechanisms needs to be strengthened. And actually, cases should be managed, holistically, together by the different actors who will even have, chances of really engaging in what globally is called case management, where they can discuss these cases to ensure that the child gets, the support, the family gets the support that they are requiring, but also to ensure that the criminal justice evidence is actually generated for the criminal justice system in order to arrive at effective prosecution. Unfortunately, in most instances, that is not the case in the country. We need to work on that.
Just briefly, Sina, when you talk about strengthening the referral pathways between these different actors, would having some kind of more centralized electronic record for cases and reports that, could be shared between police, MPA, social workers, maybe even some key members of civil society groups help in that?
Yeah, that can also be one of the, good points, that we can really put to the fore. But the digitized referral system, sometimes we are saying it's costly to put systems in place. But if we look at, treating, cases of, child violation, where children are violated sexually, physically, the state is spending even more. Unlike if we could have actually, invested in the system where referrals are digitized, and therefore the child and the caregiver do not necessarily have to explain themselves. When you go from the health facility to a police station, you have to sort of now mention, you have to narrate, what we have gone through. But if there is a digitized system that is able to pick up, from one, a department to the other, then you don't need to, the child does not necessarily need to re-explain or to really sort of explain the situation that the child was in, because that system the system will have picked that up already. Yes, it might sound costly, but at the end of it, the return on investment will be better than treating cases of, children who are actually violated and without even being given, holistic and adequate services.
Thank you, Sina. I want to take this opportunity to bring in our audience questions again. And there's a question here that I'd like to refer to you, Miranda, from Amy Slowgrove, saying perpetrators of abuse have most often experienced abuse themselves. Alongside protecting the current generation of children, Is enough being done to understand the perpetrator's life experience?
I think, we can't sort of generalize and say that most perpetrators of abuse have been victims themselves. I think one of the things we really need to understand is that actually most victims of abuse actually self-harm much more than they ever perpetrate the violence against than others. I think issues around feeling suicidal, issues around drug abuse, issues against, issues with alcohol abuse, issues with work, um, destruction, self-destruction in their relationships. I think those are far, far more prominent. I do think that the issue around understanding, and particularly if we can understand what happens with younger perpetrators when they start committing crimes, is to understand where this comes from and what is the start of this, and how much violence and physical and sexual violence have they experienced. And there has been a very, very important study that was done showing the effect, particularly of physical violence. In fact, physical violence was almost topped sexual violence on them perpetuating violence, and actually then sexual abuse was one of the offshoots of the physical violence that they had endured, that they now to gain their power back, and particularly in boy children. That's not exclusively in boy children that became men. It also happens in girl children that became women who had physical abuse. But I think that is in itself, Tamsin, a whole subject that will need. We have done extensive research, and we do work occasionally with boy children that are referred to us, who have started showing signs of physical violence and sexual violence towards other children. But I really think, because you have focused so much, and Sina covered a huge area in as far as what we can do in the criminal justice system as we're standing now, to let viewers go away with something that's really important. And I feel that right now there are several stages in the child protection process where immediate improvements are needed. And these improvements are also things that we can do very soon. In fact, we can start acting. They are happening, but they are especially at the point where children first come into contact with the system. And this includes better training and awareness at schools, at hospitals, and other frontline services. And we will also talk about police training and accountability, where cases are reported, come in, and the person who takes that first statement, or the person that gets the first disclosure, and what they do with that very important first disclosure. And of course, that can also happen and often does within the family. But we know, because children can be threatened within the family, that if they do say anything, that there will be harm to them, to another family member, to a sibling, to an animal. They will keep quiet. But it could even accidentally come out, as I say, at schools, or if the abuse is severe enough, in hospital. And I want to say that the only people authorized to act are the police right now. These are the frontline people, recognized social workers, obviously, and the courts. And these actors often become, for us, the gatekeepers rather than the facilitators of protection. So for me, what we often have to do is force the gates open as an organization. And for example, we will have to help with the statement, because the child is, or even the teenager, or we also work with adult victims who were children at the time of the abuse. And that is actually for them to think clearly, because once you've made that statement, once it is written down, to adjust that statement will be fodder for the defense attorney, and the adjustment in that statement will be questioned. So often particularly at our clinics, which are one-stop facilities. And again, going back to what Sina said, we would need 20 of us, probably 20 of us just in Gauteng alone, that coordinate, that have a one-stop center where you can coordinate every step of the process. So when the police arrives at you, you make sure a file is opened, a statement is taken, and the statement can often be taken with the social worker present and the policeman present, where the child then gets the basket of services that are all coordinated, that nothing is left to go through the cracks. We also have a forensic nurse that will then do the J88. We know very often with chronic cases of child sexual abuse, this could have happened 2 years ago. There's not always evidence. But all I'm saying is that we need to often open those gates, those gatekeepers, where they are saying, well, that statement's already been done, or we're not going to take the child to any specialized services, etc. But the role of the media, and I have to thank you very much as Daily Maverick Citizen, for this discussion today, because I think the media often plays a role in some of, unfortunately, certain cases do have a high profile, like the Jocelyn Smith, and rightly so, but there are many of those cases. But when they do, then really the focus on what went wrong in the system, what happened with the investigation. There were parts along that investigation that need a thorough, not only an investigation, but a spotlight that says, at this particular junction of this investigation, what could have happened? Could we have actually identified one of the people that would have given us an insight into perhaps where this child could be, and who was the person who actually made the deal with her mother, Kelly. So those are just some of the points that I wanted to raise here.
Miranda, I know you have to leave us a bit early, if I'm correct, still. So
about 5-6 minutes, yeah.
Before you do, then I just want to ask you to address one more question that we have from Susan Heath, which also ties into something I want to ask about how ordinary citizens, ordinary South Africans, can get involved in improving these systems of child protection. So Susan's question is, how practically can ordinary citizens ensure criminal investigations charges when prosecutors, FCS, are incompetent or possibly corrupt? What support or steps could there be to help ordinary South Africans through that process? And maybe you could let us know where people could reach out to your organization if they wanted to find out more and get support from you guys.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say very, very practically, if you know someone, whether they're a family member, a family friend, or someone at your school that is going through this process, first of all, is that we need to completely break the silence against child sexual abuse. That means when somebody brings it up, there must be no judgment. Be how can we help? Not, oh my God, what happened to the child? What's happening in that family? All sorts of things that make it so difficult for that family to actually go through the process, talk about it. Because, for instance, when you lay the charge, take the name of the police officer who's taking down your statement. Make sure you've clearly gone through it. Make sure, if you don't feel you have that support, is there maybe somebody with knowledge around children, knowledge around the law, a person that you feel supported by, that you can go and make the statement with, somebody who may know another organization that could bring you in. But just the support, number one. Having the names and the telephone numbers of the people that you're reporting to, knowing all about the court and the court process. And if you're not getting that explained well, then you can phone an organization like us and you can say, can you please tell me, we are entering in this process, exactly what happens next? What are the stages of doing this? There is some of this on our website, but you absolutely can do it, because each case also is individual. It may happen in another province, it may be a young child, an older child, etc. So I think that that's very important when one's looking at at how one can practically help people. And then schools. You know, when you report at schools, and we've had several schools are really in the spotlight now, and I call it for two things. There's sometimes they move the rubbish around. That is, they move teachers who have either had been questionable and have been reported into another school because they don't want stigma brought to their school and they don't want a bad reputation, that they've in fact had a teacher and they simply move them along without actually holding them accountable. And the other thing, and the thing there is that any child that reports to a school, it is a legal responsibility of that school to report that case immediately to an FCS officer, to a charge office who will then take it to an FCS, just so that the public understand. You can lay a charge at any police station, but then it will be brought, if it is children and it falls under sexual or physical or emotional violence, will be brought to an FCS officer and coordinated there. So I think that that's also very important, that schools are held accountable, that school governing bodies, principals and that parents and family friends are involved, and also support the families that are going through this in schools, and not like we've had in the past where the reputation of the school is more important and other parents attack this family because, oh, he's such a nice teacher or she's such a nice one, she could never have done this to your child. So those are the two very big areas that I feel as South Africans we need to change our attitude. I think we really need to shift the way we talk. We shouldn't be teaching our children to say no to adults. When have we ever taught our children to say no? Go and have your breakfast. No. Go and make your bed. No. But now somebody has sexually abused you, or we're saying to our children, you must say no to adults who have an intention to sexually abuse them. I think this, we need to really look at this whole no to adults. What we really should be expecting is adults to say no to other adults who are behaving in a harmful or an inappropriate way to children. We need, as every single individual in South Africa, we need to be brave and we need to be starting to do this, because the amount of calls that we have where people say, we heard this, but we don't want to be involved. How can you not be involved? How can you not say that I have to stand up for this child? Because ultimately the ramifications that I've told you are a massive cost on this human being's life for the rest of their lives. So you're actually participating in the continued abuse of this child. So I think adults must take responsibility. They must call out any kind of grooming behavior and they must report abuse. And
Absolutely.
that's every single adult in South Africa and the world.
Couldn't agree more. And Miranda, thank you so much. I'm going to say my thank you to you now in case you have to hop off before we wrap in the next 8 minutes or so, but really appreciate your insights and your contributions here today.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much for having me. I want to thank you very much, Sina, for all the work that you are doing at UNICEF. And you're an amazing organization. And thank you once again. And I hope I've given some thoughts today for people to think about.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sina, coming to the end of our discussion now, I really want to bring you in on this ordinary South African idea as well, because I know you've talked extensively about prevention and how important that is. And so I would like to ask you, in terms of what can happen at a family level, a community level, a school level, for ordinary South Africans to be a part of this preventative movement where we're not reacting to crimes against children, but actually diminishing the chances of those crimes occurring in the first place. And I'm going to include a question from Lindsay Bam as part of that, where she asks, prevention and starting the conversation of safety, healthy relationships, family planning, and safe sex. What is the best way to get boys involved in that conversation at a school level as well? And so if you could maybe just reflect a bit on that, and specifically the question of bringing our young men into it as well.
Thank you. Yes, I fully agree. Prevention is really, they always say better than cure. But in this instance, really, prevention is excellent in order to save, the children and to save the child's well-being. What can be done at family level? It is very important to really sort of, ensure that we really encourage the presentation of parenting programs. Parents need to be supported in order to be able to really address the needs of their children, holistically, and to ensure that, the programs that the parents need to really be subjected to will be the ones that improves the conversation with their children, that improves communication, but it should be the one that also institutionalize non-violent discipline. Rather than, I think Merinda has said it very well, that physical violence is really at the heart. And actually, you go to the mall, you see someone just spanking the child, for no apparent reason, because the child is really crying for ice cream. Other children are also witnessing that. It's like really beating up, children. It's something that is being normalized. And we should engage in dialogues, be it in communities, within our own households, be it in schools, to really condemn the impact, of and the effects of physical violence that are always really long lasting. And we can only do this by engaging in dialogues, by actually, really sharing those, best violent, discipline that parents can engage on if actually the child, has done something that is not acceptable at that particular time. But what is important is to communicate, to let the child realize I was not supposed to be doing this, so that the child can refrain from doing that, in the near future. Secondly, what is important is the social behavioral change programs to challenge, and deconstruct, the social norms that encourages, violent practices. And I would like to also emphasize the fact that sometimes within societies, really due to, the patriarchal system, you find that it is creating more of these power imbalances, the inequalities within our communities, where actually, there is a male dominance, approach, and where someone feels like, because this is my wife, this is my children, I can beat my children. That is actually not correct. So we need to really go very open. We really need to talk about this. We need to engage everybody else. We need to engage men. We need to engage boys, as you rightfully say, to really learn, the more constructive ways of engagement, the more constructive ways of actually, caring, and the more constructive ways of talking to each other rather than resorting to violence or physical violence. So it is very important that we should bring boys into the equation, and boys have actually been left behind for quite some time. We're even challenged in one of our engagement with children as UNICEF and the Department of Social Development, DBE, and I know, other, CSOs are experiencing the same, like your teddy bear, your teddy bear, we've got Childline, we've got many other, ones that are actually dealing with issues of violence against children, who actually are being challenged to say, you have been focusing too much on girl children. And the girl children are telling it openly and constructively so, that, you leave the boy child behind. This is the very same person that I will share my workspace with. I'm sharing my tertiary, a level education with. This is the person that we might be a couple, in future. How do I, get so empowered? How do I get, so informed, about the social issues and how to navigate them? And then the boy child is left behind. It is very important that actually we put the boy children and men, into the equation and actually recognize the important role they can play in addressing even the high levels of gender-based violence in the country. So it is never too late. And we just need to ensure that actually, we engage them and we make them part of the solution as well. Another critical issue that we can look at really when we have to deal with issues of, violence against children is actually to create safe spaces. Safe spaces for children. And I think actually Miranda touched on it to say children feel like, really overwhelmed, by actually, the fact that, yes, I have been violated, but who should I turn to? Should I go to my mother who will tell me, what were you doing at that particular point, or at that particular place at that time? What should I do? But it's even getting worse when they are violated in schools, where actually we send them with the hope that your child is safe. Your child has gone, to be taught, and your child is going to learn. But then you are being called and informed that, cases of sexual harassment, of sexual exploitation are happening in schools. And therefore, it is very important that we should create safety nets. And I'm aware Monica Woodhouse has just asked a question as well to say, what if actually, children turn to the police officials who are actually not even keen, to take up the statement? I think we should take cognizance of the fact that there are mechanisms in this country of reporting anybody, who is actually not giving you the service that you are anticipating. The police official who is there in the community center is also having a commander, and the commander is also having somebody who's in charge as well. If we need to really sort of go through the whole chain, or bureaucracy, we need to do that to ensure that justice is actually being done, for the child who is being violated. Let us not despair and lose hope and lose trust. And also what is important is basically to support families. Families need to be supported. We know for a fact that there is quite a number of other social ills that are happening in the families, the issues of mental health and psychosocial support, single parenthood, where the mother might, or even the dad might be overwhelmed, as I am the only one who's supposed to be providing care for these children. So we need to ensure that we build those support mechanisms where actually, parents who are overwhelmed or caregivers who are overwhelmed can really know that I can go and knock on the door, of this organization, as we have just been hearing from Miranda, where I can really get some kind of support. I can get some kind of guidance. So let us open up our offices. Let us open up, our service points to ensure that we really do as much as possible to support communities, to support children, but as well as to support families. So at every level of the ecosystem, there is a need to really strengthen services and to ensure that support services are actually, complementary to whatever service that will be provided, to really sort of address the scourge of violence against children.
Thank you, Sina, and thank you for those insights. We're being a little cheeky now because we are a smidge over time. But if you would be able to provide, is there an avenue that viewers could reach out to at UNICEF South Africa if they wanted to learn more or engage with representatives?
UNICEF South Africa is already reaching out itself even before even we can say people should reach out. We've got a number of, as I've said, when I actually talked about, the work that the organization or that UNICEF is doing to say we are working with multiple service providers that actually we are looking at, institutionalizing the best models, piloting the best models that we can finally even, take to government for scale up, your parenting programs. UNICEF is working already on that with quite a number of civil society organizations in South Africa, and UNICEF is actually, working on that to build a case in order to really sort of take that and say to government, if actually you are able to implement, this kind of programs, what works, then it will finally sort of give you the better results in addressing, violence against children. So we are already doing that. And yes, it's true. There are certain, requirements that, any organization that partners with UNICEF has to really sort of, adhere to or to comply to. But UNICEF in the country is really supporting a number of implementing partners who are really doing very good work, including the ones that are not just only addressing violence, but those that are also really ensuring that, child participation is brought to scale and it's been maximized. So we are already doing that.
Thank you, Sina. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. I'm not going to draw out the wrap up too much, but I feel like we've had this incredible opportunity to hear from these two experts in the child protection sector about not only where we can bridge some gaps in our institutions for child protection, but also what people on the ground, ordinary South Africans, can be doing to contribute towards a stronger, safer society for our young people. And so I just want to thank you, Sina, thank Miranda in absentia for lending us your expertise today. And thank you to our wonderful webinar team who are not visible, but are doing incredible stuff behind the scenes to make sure that we can have this conversation today. Wishing everybody a fantastic week ahead, and please keep warm until next time.
Thank you. Thank you.